We're going to talk about a bit about sustainability today, and I guess I would say is a glaring contradiction, but there does appear to be a bit of a disjoint between the fact that the whole world is rushing headlong towards digitalization, digital transformation, at the same time as net zero is becoming increasingly important. So I guess the first question, nice easy one, is do you think both of those things can be equally successfully addressed, or does something have to give?
They're not mutually exclusive. I suppose that's the first thing. I think that the challenge for us really is, what do we need to digitize? The challenge then for the power system and the energy system is, how do we use digitization in a clever and smart way that actually minimizes our energy consumption and reduces our emissions? So technology is good, but it needs to be applied in the right way. And that's the key challenge really for us. And this is something we seem to be learning constantly as we go along. So when we rolled out electric vehicles, as we start to roll them out even more, the challenges, even with mobile phones, chargers, we see it with the EU, it's the non-standardization of equipment, but there's a challenge, an inherent challenge in that is OEMs and equipment manufacturers, they have their own technologies. They want to push those technologies. There's an issue then with this, because that means that we have multiple different types of technologies all doing the same thing, different mobile phone chargers, different connectors, different leads, different EV charging types, different plug types. So it all gets very, very complicated. And really, we have to ask ourselves, do we have the time for this? Is it sustainable? Is it in the better interest? And actually, is it cost effective? So we don't want to sort of go back to the old monopoly era age in the telephony system, where we had basically British Telecom in the UK, and that was it. There was no opportunities for anybody else, where you had one rail supplier. A bit of competition is good, but at the moment there's still, even in the energy markets, there's a disjoint, and there's a variation between countries, across water, across energy, across, even things like food. Okay. Different market operations in the US and New Zealand, Australia, the EU. So everywhere there's different rules and regulations. And the problem for us is, are we tying ourselves up in paperwork, in digitization, in the energy sector, wholesale and retail markets? So what a wholesaler will pay for electricity on the wholesale market can vary dramatically. We've even seen it this week in the EU, the European Union, where prices in the EEX, that's the power exchange, settling prices for volumes, we're trading at, different countries from anything from 20, 30 euros to 1,000 and odd euros. So there's a lot of variation there. So, we even see it with petrol prices, gasoline prices, diesel prices vary from one country to the next. And this is the challenge for us. So how do we make this market and this global economy fit with all these different circumstances and still achieve our climate change targets and our net zero transition? That's the key challenge with any sector. So, it's not the digitization of services is not going to be any different to any other sector. And I think actually probably that sector can manage itself very well if it thinks about it now, and they're good at planning. Other sectors like the agriculture sector, the aviation sector, they're going to run into far more difficulties moving forward. Because the price margins in the ICT comms sector, they're not colossally different around the world. Whereas you look at food, you look at energy, it does vary dramatically. And this is a key challenge. And we see this already in countries with people, having to go to food banks. They're struggling to pay their rent and their bills. They're struggling to pay their energy bills. So this is the challenge. And I suppose the big warning I would give to this sector is, we see it I was in London there yesterday, and I was watching the news, and the first thing that people are doing is they're giving up gym memberships. So, the ICT sector is the same. People will use their mobile phone, their tablet, their computer longer. So that sector may also feel the pinch if we continue on the way we're going, and we can see it with the climatic conditions, the situation in Russia. It's a global economy now. We made it so. So we have to be prepared for the consequences of that. And this is the problem. We're not thinking about those consequences.
Yeah, and I mean, with the data center sort of industry and the ICT more generally, obviously, you said obviously every industry got the same challenges, but clearly in every industry, ICT and data centers are, if you like, the foundations, aren't they? They're more and more, so they are going to.
I wouldn't call them the foundation. I wouldn't call them the foundation, right, because actually it's the people are the foundation. Okay, they're at the heart, the core of the function.
Yeah.
So it's a process. So before ICT and before data centers, we had lots of paper and we had fax machines. So it's a different process. It's using a different pipe or conduit, but at the heart of it is the human individual, and how society and how politicians and industry, how we develop that the functionality of that system. And that's the challenge really. We've let data centers sort of develop themselves. And that's the interesting thing about the ICT sector. And you can see it when they try to regulate it in the EU, in the States, even data management, GDPR. There's a big backlash from the sector. And it's not that there's a backlash. The sector doesn't know how to handle it because it's a very innovative sector. It's used to startups. It's used to spin outs. It's used to, even the process. It takes a box from somebody else that's manufactured by Dell or Intel or whoever, you know what I mean? And then HP, and then they take that piece of kit and then they manipulate and use it. And it's a digital footprint. So that digital footprint, it's a soft product. You're not making tins of Guinness. You're not making tins of Murphy's. You're not making tins of Heineken. It's a very different system. And that it's been left off to do what it wishes. But the problem is that it's going to have to become sustainable, and it's going to have to meet, like Google or Microsoft going away and buying a wind farm to supply its green energy needs for a data center. That's greenwashing in a way, because it's not solving the bigger issue. And they're the challenges that we need to sort of rise up to meet. That sector is used to slick media. And you can see it around the world. Politicians have followed suit, and other sectors have followed suit with that slick media campaign and profiling and targeted sort of focused market public interventions to sell a product. And that's the challenge. And how do we do this? And how do they I don't like myself. I think over-regulation is a killer for any industry. It's actually a killer for every sector. But I think the ICT sector is carrying a bit of a baggage, particularly the data center sector. When you look at dark data, it makes up 50-odd%, half of the energy footprint. It serves no function. It costs them money in the long run. It's a problem they're going to have to deal with. But if you look at the sector in itself, it's the services that they offer and the way they offer them to the public with free data. That's probably at the heart of the issue. Because what they're doing is there's no such thing as a free lunch. They find out what they're doing and then they're pushing ads. So it's how that business model works, and how they, I go in and I surf the web. I look up Adidas, I look up Nike. I see they have a profile. I'm looking for t-shirts, and next I'll get these messages in my pop-up, in my Gmail, whatever. That kind of service, you sort of have to think, is that sustainable into the future? But there's a huge marketing background behind that, and that's another industry. So it's a sort of a whole tiered approach. How do we interlink all these sectors? That's the challenge.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, how acceptable with I'm not saying they do, because as you allude to, the data center industry is beginning to take its sort of responsibility seriously. But how justifiable is it to say, well, actually, we're not the problem, because we're literally, as you say, all your retail guys want to sell stuff, want to be clever with however they get to people. So we're just providing the infrastructure. So it's not for us really to tell people to use less of our infrastructure. And obviously they've got a vested interest in more of that infrastructure being used, etc. But so where does the data center ICT industry sit with, in terms of its responsibilities, I suppose?
Well, they've made great strides. Okay, so people are a bit negative, and I suppose I come from the Republic of Ireland, and you've seen it in the country. There's been a bit of a moratorium from EirGrid, the grid transmission operator, the TSO, the transmission system operator, and they've sort of said we don't want any more grid connections from data centers. No, they did the same with wind farms. We forget all these things, and these things happen with wind, they happen with solar in the US, they happen with wind in the US. We have a power system really that's 50 years old, and governments are in essence forgetting this is 50, 60 years old. The troglodyte in the system, the dinosaur in the system is the distribution system. Okay, and that will struggle as more and more variable renewable wind, solar, other forms of energy, because there's going to be other forms of energy are going to start to come in the grid into the future. And it's how do we balance all of those together? Now, we can see it with the power usage efficiency, you know, in the last, say, 10 years, it's halved. It's gone from, say, about 2.5 down to 1.5, aiming for 1.1. You're never going to get 100%. You're never going to get it down to unity. It's never going to be one. That's, you know, that would be if somebody did that, I'd be amazed. Technically, engineering, I just think it's not going to happen. It would be great if it did, but it's not. But then it would be the same, the internal combustion engine, everything else in the world. If we got it down to 100% efficiency, the world would be a perfect place to live in. But worldwide, we can see, we expect data is going to grow. It's already grown. You know, it's trebled over the last 4 or 5 years. It's gone from 2 exabytes in 2015, expected to be 11 exabytes in 2025. That's massive. And if 50% of that is dark data, just so we can make a business model to push an ad to sell a pair of Adidas runners, and I'm just picking them. Okay, it could be Nike, it could be Puma, it could be anybody else. Okay, it could be Primark, Pennies, Marks and Spencers, to push a sale of a product in the greater good. We have to sort of wonder, is that a good business proposition? And that's what the industry has to ask themselves. Are they being honest? And it'll feed through, because those, you know, those sectors that are selling an actual physical product, or even a holiday or a digital product, or, you know, a newspaper or some sort of, or Netflix or something like that, their, you know, chief executives are going to be under the same social and corporate environmental responsibilities as somebody in the ICT sector. They're going to be under the same responsibilities. We can see it already with the sort of the pushback from shareholders, shareholders who are more into the climate change, they're more into sustainability. They see a business plan, like, I mean, it's not good business for, you know, Heathrow to turn around and say, oh, we're limiting 100,000 passengers through Heathrow every day. So, and then I think it was UAE or Qatar or one of the airlines turned around and said, no, we're not going to do that. You know, we've made an agreement. That's it. You have to facilitate us. So this is the problem. There's a bit of give and take. It's a food chain. So even though I buy my runners online, or I buy my Marks and Spencers, or I buy my Gap hoodie, so we saw Gap close down all their shops, they're going to retail online. There's a huge sort of a dynamic in the industry that we forget about. It's like a spider's web. And there's a lot of people employed in different sectors. It's not just alone in the data center, or in the creation of the platforms and the software and all the apps that go behind all of this. There's people in factories making runners, making t-shirts, making cheese, blocks of cheese all over the world, bottles of beer, pharmaceuticals, that are part of this industry through 2 degrees of separation. So all those chief executives are going to be under the same pressure to green their industry. So if 50% of, we'll take SAP or Siemens or ABB, or even, you know, Deloitte or any of these companies around the world, if 50 or 60% of the data, even governments, education, third level institutes, Elsevier, I'm an editor-in-chief of an Elsevier journal, if they have multiple copies of data that's redundant sitting on their servers, they have to ask themselves, why am I doing this? Why am I paying for this? Is it necessary? So then, you know, you have the dark data that's never going to be used again. 30% is redundant or abandoned data. Really, probably 13 or 20% of data sitting on servers around the world is really critical data. And that's the data we need to sort of mind, invest the time and effort in, and sort of make a better standards. Like, I mean, I'm a civil engineer, is my undergrad degree, PhD is in power systems. And, you know, I always find when I deal with the power systems or the energy sector, and the same with the telecoms, when I worked in Siemens, it was telecoms, I worked in mobile phone telephony and fiber optic cable, and they're mad for data. They're mad for lots of equipment. They want to get milliseconds. You know, I'm from civil engineering. We use rules of thumb. It doesn't fail. There's lots of redundancies in our systems. You know, we have to ask ourselves, why are we storing all this information all the time? You know, and the consumer and the industry has to say, an honest dialogue, you know, maybe me having 500 photos on my iPhone and uploading them to the Apple iCloud, really, what's the point? I'm never going to look at them again. So these are it's not just the ICT sector making changes. Look, we take the US, 2020, 14 billion kilowatt hours was spent on data centers and energy alone. That's 6.5 million tons of carbon emissions. It's massive. We see the heat dome over Europe. We see the heat dome over the Middle East. There's a heat dome over the America. Then we have extreme cold domes with extreme highs and lows. It affects your infrastructure. Your train lines will buckle. Your asphalt on your road will melt. People are switching on their air conditioning. People find it uncomfortable to live in. It's going to have an effect on our food and how our grain grows. Ignoring Russia, this was going to happen anyway. So we've been saying it for 50, 60 years, 100 years ago, actually 80 years ago, this was identified as an issue. It's not a new phenomena. It's just that really the United Nations and the IPCC in the last 30, 40 years, it's become to the fore. After the Brundtland report, it started with greenhouse gas emissions and ozone. We made a change there. We can make a change, but we have to do it in a positive way. And we have to be practical. And this is the thing, there's lots of people out there. They're slick environmentalists and they're slick academics and they're slick industrialists, and they make it sound like it's going to be all wonderful and hydrogen is the solution or nuclear is the solution. It's not. It's going to be a mix of everything. And we have to be prepared to learn, make mistakes and get on with it. We're fighting a war. It's like World War II. You know, we're going to have to mobilize the troops. That's what we're going to have to do.
But do you, I mean, I guess politics has to come into it at some stage, but, you know, for example, our current sort of conservative leadership campaign, they're being criticised, or people are making the observation that none of them are talking about the environment. I think one or two of them maybe said, well, you know, the green levy is going to get, you know, kicked into touch. I mean, do you worry that there aren't enough politicians, you know, whether it's in the UK or globally, that, you know, when things are good, yes, fine, we'll, you know, have a green levy and we'll, you know, head off roughly towards net zero. But the minute there's a bit of a
don't blame politicians,
like, we'll bin the green stuff. But
I don't blame politicians. Okay, we elect politicians. If you look at democracies and you look at the turnout, you're talking 40, 50, 60% of a turnout for a vote. So that's the first thing. Okay. And then people complain after the fact. And then it's hyped up in the media. That's not a solution. That's the first thing. Second thing is, it was disappointing when I didn't see any of the Conservative candidates go to the climate change, the scientist tasked with net zero, tasked with, you know, supporting us through this transition. It's the same in the US. You know, Trump poo-pooed it. But actually, probably Trump was quietly beavering away in the background, doing deals, trying to get things done. But for the public, because he was thinking of his votership, he made it sound negative. But actually, if you look at some of the things he did, he was quite innovative. Other things were a disaster. But he realizes it's bad business. It's bad business, of course, if you think about it. London, centre of London, under 2 or 3 meters of water. Centre of New York, down the bull on the stock exchange, Chicago Mercantile, all these places around the world, Shanghai, all those factories. And they're all going to be 1 or 2, 3 meters underwater if we continue on the way we are. So this is the problem. So then you have to look at, you know, what are Blackstone investing in? What is Warren Buffett investing in? Where are we going? Is it a short-term profitable proposition? Or is it a 10 or a 15 or a 20 or a 30 year, 2.5%, 3% return on your investment? Is that what they want? Or are they looking for profit margins? You know, I sell a piece of kit for ABB, I'm making 9 to 15%. I sell an MRI, I'm making maybe 30%. then there's the maintenance of it afterwards. It's the same in every sector. They have all different problems, but I don't blame the politicians. I blame the fact that they have to live in the moment in a political situation where the public are fickle. We probably privatized too much too quickly without planning ahead for climate change because it wasn't in the psyche at the time. That's probably one of the lessons that we can look back on. We look at public transport, rail transport, bus transport. You know, New York, it's great. They have a great public transport system. Well, it's functioning. But you have to ask, when you go to China and you can get a train, they're going to have a train that's going to go from Beijing to Shanghai in 2.5 hours. Why isn't that in the States? You know, and when we look back to the last collapse of the economy, when there was a downturn in 2009, 2010, and the few years in the run up to that, they all got on their Boeing 747s out of Detroit, headed down to Washington and got bailed out. The banks got bailed out. But now when the shoe is on the other foot, people are slow to support individuals, and the politicians are in a very tricky situation because they have lobbyists, there's factories, you know, it's coalition. It's like politics by consensus amongst politicians wherever you go in the world at the moment, because everybody wants everything wherever they live. You know, you see it in London. You want to live in the Cotswolds, but you want to have 5G, fiber optic, mobile network, and you want to be able to, you want to have everything. And, you know, there's no sort of boundaries on people's expectations anymore. You know, the aviation sector, we open up after COVID, we're after leaving people go, and all of a sudden we think we can all go on our 2 weeks holidays to Malaga and there's going to be no problem. You know, I think, have we become selfish? And then we complain about immigration and people coming from developing countries where there's political instability, where there's strife, where there's a lack of water, where there's a lack of job opportunities, and people say, why are you coming here? And we sort of forget, you know, all these places of resources, they just need support. But then there's a lot of corruption. So these are all the challenges we face in the sustainability paradigm. You know what I mean? And it's hard. It's hard for data centers because data centers are all over the world. We look at China, 70% of the data center energy is met by coal. We go to the States. The biggest conurbation of data center is in Virginia, you know, because it's feeding Washington, D.C. Most of that is by fossil fuel power. So there's a lot of things we can do. There's a lot of people out there who are selling technologies and solutions that may not deliver. We look at solar PV panels. Are they recyclable? We look at now, you even take Skoda. I see the ads in the telly. They're using bamboo. They're using this. It's like, you know, I live in the UK and Ireland. I live between Belfast and Cork. I get a train sometimes I drive, but I tell you, my carbon footprint is actually far lower than a lot of people who have to commute to work every day. But I'm very lucky. But, you know, then I see people with, you know, I buy a Kiwi and then I say to myself, can you imagine the carbon footprint of that Kiwi? Do I really need a Kiwi? So these are all the problems. So it's the same with data. So I wouldn't say to the industry, berate yourself or be negative. I would say, look at what's out there in terms of technology. And for me, the smart grid, and I hate to call it the smart grid. I hate the word smart grid. I hate the word future grid. I hate the words intelligent grid for the power system. To me, it's a net zero grid. Okay. Because nothing's smart. Okay. That's the first thing. We're all, even a computer isn't very smart when it hasn't got the right software update. Even a switch in a substation isn't very smart when something goes wrong. It overheats. So to me, how can we get data centers to reduce their water footprint, their land footprint? They're doing all of these things. Some locations are better than others. Some countries have better opportunities for data, but then you have to put in the fiber optic cable. You have to drop it across the Atlantic. You have to put more fiber optic cable around the world. But at the same time, then people are saying, you know, we want more interconnectivity for power in the US, in Asia, you know, the European smart grid. There's talks of it in South America, interconnectivity of the energy system, the electricity system, this mass electrification of transport, aviation. I think because it was so easy And it wasn't easy to put wind and solar PV on the power system. People think that that's the solution now to all their woes. The massive electrification of everything is going to be the solution to everything. It's not. And we have to sort of recognize that. The hydrogen highway, that pathway, there's issues with hydrogen. It's still a gas that causes issues with global warming when it leaks. The energy density of it, retrofitting the gas network. We're still investing in the gas network. Do we still need to invest in the gas network? Do we need to have new connections? Probably yes. But do the public want to hear it? Do the environmentalists want to hear it? No, they don't. Because they want 100% renewable energy systems. They want everything electrified. That's the challenge. So how do we marry that? And we have to accept, I think we've gone sort of beyond the climate change. Now we're actually in the age of change. That kind of, what would be the word? I'm looking for the word. And the best word really is, we're in the necrocene. So we've gone beyond this anthropogenic era where the change has happened. We see it now. So we're going to have to cope. But the decision now for the likes of Zurich and AIG around the world, who underwrite and insure everything, okay, because it's the same all over the world. The challenge for them now is for them to say, well, actually, I'm going to have to write off some of these assets and some of these investments we've made. But we've seen it with Shell and BP. Okay, so they wrote off assets. There was, you know, they were going to be going into green energy and doing this, that, and the next thing. And they made huge profits. Their profits were massive this year and last year. It's a supply chain issue. And this is the problem. As climate change increases the effects of it, it's going to be exponential. It's going to get quite uncomfortable for all of us. Do we have to get used to it? And do we have to learn how to work, behave, and change, and have different expectations to what we currently have? That's the key. That's the key. How data centers can do this, in my opinion, is, first of all, get rid of this dark data and redundant data. Look at their business and financial model, and then see how they offer their services across the industry to those people who are selling hard or physical products through their platforms. And then we also have to see how we can use the resources of the data center, so the UPS, the backup generation. Can we put solar panels on the roof? Will we, you know, even looking at the cooling, are we going to, do we have to shift to liquid cooling to get that energy intensity and air conditioning down? These are really key. They're really key. But people, can I say something to you? Wastewater has a bigger carbon footprint and carbon emission footprint and energy footprint than the ICT sector. But it's completely forgotten about. It's completely forgotten about.
I do some work in the water industry. You're right. I think it's 3% of global energy consumption or something like that is the drives and controls and pumps and everything associated with the water. But in terms of the data center sector, I mean, you raised a whole number of issues. It always strikes me, I mean, there is, as you say, a trade-off, because, you know, if you're in the city of London and selling stocks and shares, then
you have a diesel backup generator and you're hoofing out your not even that, it's particulate matter, it's ppms.
But latency is obviously an issue, so you want your data center close to where you're doing your business. But for the vast majority of us, it strikes me that a relatively easy win, and it seems beginning to happen, that, you know, places like the Nordics that do appear to have fairly plentiful supplies of renewable energy sources, you know, it's an obvious place, and obviously the climate is pretty good as well. So do you think the industry is potentially going to have to think about location much more than it does? Because at the moment, as you say, they're actually building data centers here, there, and everywhere, and interconnecting on a more local level.
Why, yeah, no, you're on the money. This is why I said, okay, Zurich, AIG, underwriters, you know, they have to sort of, there's a risk associated with all these things. I'd love to know what the actuaries are doing in the planet at the moment. Are they asleep at the wheel? You know, because if you think about it, putting all data centers in say Iceland or the northern hemisphere of the Scandinavian countries, that's an issue in itself, because you have to put in all this fiber optic cable. But if you look at sort of, does everything have to be in London? So we've seen it with the levelling up, and I know some people love it, some people hate it. This distribution of, we've Manchester, we've Scotland, maybe if like today or tomorrow, I think it's going to be 36 or 37 in Manchester. So even though it's going to probably maybe reach 40 in London, can you imagine the air conditioning in those data centers and the load? Okay. Scotland would probably be a better bet. Northern Ireland would be a better bet. Ireland is going to be more temperate. It's going to be a better bet. Denmark's going to have issues. It's going to feel it's a little bit isolated as well. The Nordic countries, yes. Iceland, in my mind, it's very isolated. It's in the middle of nowhere, but we don't know what's going to happen as climate changes there. But then there's soil conditions, there's water issues. You've put in the infrastructure, there's nothing there. And then in the winter,
volcanoes as well, don't they?
Well, they've volcanoes, and you must forget, we're still going to get snow. We're going to get extreme cold as well in the winter. So that's it. That's the other flip side of it. So we're looking for temperate climates. Data centers like temperate climates. And so that's the first thing. And that's what we need to look at. So I suppose it's a map of the correct operating constraints, and that's what they do. I know a key driver as well is political stability, security of the data. They're some of the key drivers as well for data centers for countries, developing countries, where there's obviously security of data issues, etc. Other parts of the world, they're not as constrained. Like India will have to ask itself with the weather it's going to experience, really, are they the right place for data centers and call centers? Can that continue? That's an issue, because they're going to struggle. Their network is their power system is quite archaic. The distribution grid there's a lot of issues in India with the power system, and Pakistan is the same. They have a lot of outages, but we've even seen it with South Africa recently. So the issue is really temperate climates, accessibility to comms, high quality fiber optic cable, whether satellite will work as the weather conditions change, I don't know. That's another issue people are forgetting about. Okay, so because the cloud movements, weather patterns are all going to change. We're going to have different pressure patterns. I'm on my summer holidays, and on Monday or Tuesday night, we could pick up, I'm in Cork in the Republic of Ireland at the moment, we could actually pick up 2 transmitters in Wales for a television signal because of the weather. So these are the things, all these engineering, scientific changes are going to happen to us. And we seem to forget around the world that the planet we live in is a result of human involvement and interference. There's very few places in the world, maybe the Amazon, okay, where there's very little human interference. And we can see in Brazil, they've been clawing away at that and cutting down the forests, parts of Asia as well, where there's very little places left where there's very little human interaction. So when we go all across America, the fields, if we went to America 400, 500, 600 years ago, it's a very different place. If you came to the island of Ireland or the British Isles 600, 700, 800 years ago, it was covered in forest 900 years ago. So we've evolved and changed, and we're just going to have to learn how to evolve and change and deal with the limited resources and the boundary conditions on the planet. I suppose, I don't know whether you've ever heard of the organization called the Club of Rome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, have you ever heard of them?
Yep.
So they wrote their report back in, I think it was the 70s. It was done by, I think, some guys in MIT, some States, Europe, and they sort of, really, that report was ahead of the curve. And what they predict is what's happening now at the moment. And maybe we need to think more like that, be more cynical. It can't be, I know she's wonderful, Greta Thunberg. I'm sorry now for mispronouncing her surname. But everybody does the same with my name, my first name. But I suppose, you know, how we live and how we do things, we're in for a big wake-up call. So data centers, everybody's going to have to change their business proposition. So we can do it with, we've reduced down the PUE significantly. The location is key. Temperate climates is key. Fiber optic cable connectivity is key. The UPS and backup services, they're key. Getting rid of redundant and dark data, that's actually probably the first thing that I would tackle. If anybody asked me what would you do now, I would make that the first port of call, because you have to get rid of that. You're really minding the critical data, and that's what we want to mind into the future, the critical data.
So yeah, but just to that point, obviously one of the current trends, if you like, I mean, big data as a term has been around for a while, but the world and his wife is being encouraged on a business side to keep every bit of data, because then you can process it and find out more about your customers and improve the customer experience and sell more. So again, you've got that contradiction, haven't you? I agree with you entirely. You know,
that's, do you know what? No, that's academics in computer science and people selling, you know, and this is the thing, okay? The cloud, all these, you know, you can press a button and everybody can know this, that, and the next thing. Do you know what? The more data you save, you have a data issue. First, you can't mine it. You don't know what you're looking for. Computer scientists, it's not that they don't understand what they're looking at some of the time, because it's not, they're not looking at an X-ray. They don't understand the way the NHS, or in America, whatever hospital is, our GP, or, you know, specialist or accountant. Everybody has different practices. So one shoe doesn't fit all. And I hate to tell you, you know, what you know, so you have, you know, when I switch on my TV and on my washing machine every day, every week, do you need all that information? Do you need all my digital footprint? And this is the thing, like, I mean, really, I think they're sort of overselling some of these organizations a product that they don't need. It's like using a hammer to crack a little peanut. You know,
yeah, I would guess it comes back to what you said earlier about expectations, because I guess at one level, you know, if my washing machine manufacturer rings me up and says it's about to break down, can we send someone over to fix it? I might go, hey, wow, that's amazing, you know, they've saved me. But, you know, if it does break down and someone comes in 24, 48 hours and fixes it, does that really, you know, am I going to be that outraged? So it's managing expectations as well.
Well, I tell you what, now it's great to ring you up and say that the washing machine is going to break down, but the problem for us is we have a skills shortage, because for the last 30 years, developing, and if you look at China and India, countries all over the world, in Africa, there's been this mad drive to send everybody to university. So it's all about having a degree. It's become like a cottage industry. So what we have a shortage of is plumbers, steel fixers, carpenters, tilers, window glazers, you know, riggers, fitters. These are the people we're short. These are the people who we need in the climate change conditions. We don't need a whole load of people who can write code. You know, if you think about it, so it's great you can ring me up, you know, and tell me, oh, you need to send your car in for a service. Normally what I would have done is I would have said, oh yeah, I need an annual service, and I would have brought it in and booked it in. So now a light flashes in my car and tells me, oh, bring your car in 1,000 kilometers. Sure, I would have known anyway. Sure, I was going to bring it in anyway for his annual service. So we sort of have to ask ourselves, really, are some of these services, are they worth the money? Are they worth the effort? Should we be trying to invest in the human capacity to service? So even if you do tell me, I know I'm going to be waiting probably 2 weeks for the plumber to come. Plumber's probably more expensive than the guy at the end of the line who's ringing me to say, hang on a second, you need to have your washing machine serviced. Because he's still going to have to come out in his van, isn't he?
So, I mean, getting to the nub of it, I get your point earlier. You said, you know, it's not politicians to blame.
It's a slick industry.
But yeah, but who? I mean, surely governments, you know, whether it's the COP, you know, COP event that happened, and they'll continue to happen. I mean, globalization is an issue in the sense that, you know, I guess a lot of people are frightened that, you know, if we do something to, as they, you know, as they see it, you know, if we do a lot of net zero stuff and somebody else doesn't, they have a competitive advantage. So we're all kind of nervous of each other. But also, I mean, do you not just think governments have to at least start the debate or issue those warnings and say, look, you know, if we carry on as we are for the next 30, 40 years, yeah, London's going to be underwater, half of East Anglia is going to be underwater, whatever it is, and therefore it's time and we need some radical solutions. So guess what? You know, we can't all drive around the country, fly abroad, and clearly that's very unpopular, back to your politician point, but is that where we've got to? Somebody needs to be brave, and yes, there are some benefits as well, but until we get that, it's almost deck chairs Titanic, because nobody's going to make the first move.
See, we can say we've learned one thing from COVID. When we ran out of ventilators and masks, somebody else has a competitive advantage. But if Kiwis are, if cheap lamb is coming from New Zealand, okay, you're going to have to realize you're going to have a climate change issue. You're going to have a shipping and logistics issue. It might take longer. There's going to be different impacts. The fuel cost, the processing cost out in New Zealand by the time it gets here. Actually, they're not going to have an edge anymore. So the business edge of that kind of, you know, location, we'll send everything out to China, they can make everything out there. Countries now have realized from COVID, we need to be able to look after ourselves. So it's not just an energy security, it's a food, a water, and an energy security issue. It's being able to service your own population or the area or region that you live in a way that you can ship quite easily and move things about, and not have to wait for something to come from a factory. And I don't want to be picking China all the time, because I think it's unfair on the Chinese economy. We made it that, okay, we made it that. So and again, you know, I think all of that is going to change. And I think with you know, this summer it's going to hit 50 degrees in parts of India, and it already had, and they're having, you know, flooding, and you know, a data center in some location is going to be underwater. That's the issue now that they're going to face there. So I don't think people are going to have the competitive edge that they think they are going to have. Like, I mean, I'm Irish, and I, you know, there's a big kerfuffle here all the time about we want to be green, because obviously the people associate Ireland with having green, beautiful, lush countryside, blah, blah, blah. But the issue is that Ireland actually, overall, we're not one of the biggest polluters in the world at all. So if you look at the countries around the world, it's those top G: Germany, Japan, America, China, Russia. They're all the biggest emitters. France, if you look at them, Italy, they're actually the biggest emitters around the world, because they're huge manufacturing bases. And they're the countries actually who are going to have to take the lead on this, and they're going to have to bring the developing countries along with them. There's a need for data in developing countries as well. There's a need for those services for those people, as well as water. So there's a water security issue, food security issue, energy security issue, data, digitalisation security issue. There's so many security issues, but they all link back to climate change. But at the top of the pyramid is really the financial aspects of it. And what, you know, you look at Elon Musk and you look at what he's doing, and, you know, is he really thinking about the recyclability of the lithium-ion batteries that he puts into? We already have a battery mountain around the world. You know, he's worth billions. What's he going to do with all that money? He can only sleep in one bed. So this is, you know, it's like, I suppose, look, it's like what's going on in the golf at the moment. You know, you have to say to yourself, you know, what are you going to do with all that money? You can only eat so much calories in a day. You can only there's only so many hours in the day. And this is the problem with people. It's a bit of are we getting too greedy? Our expectations. And I think that's sort of the challenge, you know, the circular economy of the data centers, improving the land, the water, the technology, balancing the UPS, integrated into the power system. All of those things we can do, getting rid of redundant and dark data. We can do those things. but there's a seed change that needs to be made in the financial services consideration, the global manufacturing supply chains, that really, I think it's going ignored. We're sort of living in the moment. And I go back to the politicians. I don't blame the politicians, because actually when they make a policy target and the next government comes in, you know, at the moment we seem to have, it's 4, 5, 6 years of a government, then we flip into another government of another political persuasion, and then they'll come out with another policy document, and all the policy documents need to be changed. And then it's the same stuff with a little slight different spin with targets. It's like retrofitting for buildings. You know, the issue or the challenge is we don't have those tradespeople. Tradespeople is the key challenge for us. Technicians, the guy who's going to go into, who's the guy who maintains, you know, they might call them engineers, but the guy who maintains the data center is really, in my mind, a technician. You know, I think, you know, everybody has to have all these pieces of papers and qualifications, and the value of money. We even see it with paying rent. The value of money is sort of, it's too easy. You know?
Do you also think, I mean, consumption, I mean, I always sort of remember my parents' generation. I mean, you know, the house we lived in, 3-piece suite, every 10 years they'd get it reupholstered and they'd still have the same 3-piece suite. We've got in, whether it's 3-piece suites or televisions, whatever, we just got into this model of every 12, 18 months,
disposable
2 years,
living.
You want, and do you think, again, we're going to have to learn, and obviously big business likes us to buy new whatever it is every year, because then they make a, you know, a wedge more money.
The business.
But yeah, at some stage we have to say no, you know, you're going to have to actually, you know, buy quality. It might be a bit more expensive, but it's going to last longer. And again, whether that's regulations, or do you think us as consumers there'll be a groundswell, as you know, clearly there's ethical products out there. How does that sort itself out?
Well, I suppose looking at it at the moment, there's probably, maybe if you look at it, they get a lot of media attention, you know, the young climate activist, the climate investor activist, they get a lot of attention. They're great media bite for, say, the BBC or RTE or MBS or Fox or whoever, and they all think it's quite dramatic in that moment, but it doesn't solve any problem. Ordinary people will move to the best value. So, you know, you're going to have the 10-15% of activists at one end. Then you have the other people who don't believe in anything and they think climate change isn't an issue. And then you have 60% in the middle ground, who are balanced, who will do the best thing. But their best thing is based on the decision of being able to afford it. So affordability is key. So climate change has to be affordable, and people are forgetting that. And products, so, you know, this disposable living of products, I think maybe we're going to have to pay more, as you say, to have a better product to last a little bit longer. That's better in terms of its recyclability, characteristics and parameters, in terms of the circular economy. You know, I think it's that 50 or 60, but getting people out to vote is key as well. For us in the developed world, obviously, there's different political sort of formations around the world. This is another thing we're going to have to deal with, you know, so there's still strife in certain parts of the world. You know, not everybody gets to vote like we do. And we're going to have to work with these countries. We may not like it, but we're going to have to do it. And we can't take the moral high ground when it comes to the planet, climate change, because actually it's bad for business.
Yeah, and as people point out, obviously we've had our time in the sun and made all our money, and now we're turning around to all these developing countries and saying, well, actually, you know, we polluted the world and made a load of money doing it, but you can't do that now, when they, you know, they're clean. So I suppose, I mean, to summarize, if it's possible, but are you, bear in mind all we've talked about, are you optimistic that we will sort of get there by hook or by crook, or are you worried that, for, you know, some of the reasons we've discussed, selfishness will out and we'll kind of bimble along, and then whether it's London or New York, and it will be some massive natural disaster, then everyone will go, oh my word, you know, it's time to act, and whether it's then too late or not, there'll be a massive scramble because people realize just how, you know, I know everyone says, you know, for as long as there are droughts in Africa, it sounds horrible, but you know, it's not in the Western world, so it's no impact. But if it starts happening here, or floods,
it's
not just, you know, little floods, but will people start setting up? But are you positive or negative about where it's going?
I'm positive, okay, because but my nature isn't negativity, okay, so I'm positive by nature, but I'm very critical and I critique a lot, because you must plan for the worst case scenario when it comes to these sort of disasters, okay. So we've already seen a few years ago, we had very bad flooding in Europe there last summer. Remember this time last summer was a lot of flooding? Mm-hmm. Remember there was one or two German towns, a Dutch town. In Belgium, there was some issues. So, you know, we need to prepare for those things. I think we will. I think that the COVID has helped us realize we need to do it sooner. But I think the people who really need to make the difference with governments and with the public are our financial leaders. The people with the money around the world are the people responsible for the movement, making, investing, managing of all the money. Because really, as I said to you, affordability is key. I'm not a person who is happy with the term carbon taxation. I don't feel comfortable with carbon taxation. We need to figure out how to work our money in a different way and what we need to invest in. The infrastructure in the US is falling apart. The parts of the infrastructure around the world are falling apart. But we need tradespeople, and I think that's going completely unrecognised. And the business proposition of how we move, ship, advertise, sell products and services, and this marketing engine behind it needs to be sort of carefully looked at.
And do you think, I mean, it struck me as well, during the pandemic, we were restricted in our movements, and local communities anecdotally, and I think in reality, begun to, if not thrive, at least, restored some of the, what they'd lost. Do you think localization is an inevitable sort of end result? We'll have to start withdrawing from global supply chains to more local. So, I live in Wiltshire, so I'll get most of my food hopefully from within, I don't know whether it's Wiltshire or, a 50-mile radius, as you say, as opposed to getting a Kiwi fruit thrown in from wherever. Do you think we'll have to learn that, and traveling even, a holiday abroad will be seen as a luxury rather than, oh, I'm entitled to my 2 weeks wherever it is? Do you think that's
I think it will be regional.
Regional, okay, yeah.
Regional. I think that we're going to start to have to look at more rail infrastructure. I think that aviation is a sector. You look at air transport. There was a report out there yesterday. I don't know who wrote the report, but everybody talks about the electrification of aviation industry. That has, in my own opinion, has limited applications. Hydrogen in aviation, again, density is a limited application. There was somebody talked about having, a nuclear engine in the aviation world. So some of this now is sort of going into the sort of, fly, we're going to be going to Mars sort of technology concepts at this stage. It's a bit cracked. So I just think that it will be regional. So we're going to have trading regions. So, and if you look at what's going on in China, they're sort of more focusing on their own region. They're looking at Asia. America, I think with South America and Canada, I think it'll be their region. Europe will have its region. Africa is going to need help. The Middle East is going to need help and some parts of South America are going to need help as well because of the political instabilities and issues there. I think we need to leave a lot of our religious issues, differences, LGBTQ, what we believe, what we don't believe, all of this kind of thing really needs to be left outside the discussion. When it comes to climate change, and we need to help each other out. And I think data and the ICT sector has a huge role to play on how we communicate between regions and how we work together and how we mitigate for working from home, bit of flexibility. I think they have a big role to play in this, and they can be leaders in that aspect of delivering on aspects of climate change that they probably haven't considered.
And in terms of the sort of as individuals, I mean, clearly financial incentives or penalties, I mean, I think mentioned earlier, right at the start, you know, if we're all encouraged to take as many photos as we like, and there's no obvious cost. You know, you might be asked to pay an extra 25 pence a month to your cloud provider or whatever, but do you think there has to be some pricing mechanisms in there as well, just to say, look, you can't take thousands of photos of your dog or your holiday, you know, limit yourself to 10, or, you know, or you know, financially understand it.
I caveat that in, I wouldn't like to live in a world, and we have a world already where we have like class systems.
No.
Yeah. So I wouldn't want to be in a situation where I say to somebody, you know, living somewhere in England, oh, you can't have your week in the sun. Or you're not entitled to your holiday because you're a working class person and you can't afford it because the Ryanair business model may collapse in 20 years. Do you follow? Or the EasyJet business model will collapse in 20. So there's going to be a bit of give and take of how we manage these things in the better goodment.
Another suggestion's been mooted that we, you know, individuals and I guess companies as well are given a certain amount of, you know, points, whatever you call them, you know, environmental point credits or whatever, and therefore you can choose how you use them, but each individual or organizer, do you think that sort of idea has legs to get around that sort of social angle?
We're very funny animals in that when we see like these sort of points and grades, it's like somebody doing an A-level exam. We just focus on how to figure out how to get the points and we don't solve the problem. So I'm not a big believer in that. No. If we have a good exchequer, we have a good chancellor in charge of HMRC, as it is in the UK. Every country has their own. And if it's managed the right way and the books are balanced and they know where they're going to invest into the future, then we solve the problems. If we're only living in the moment from one budget to the next with no proper plan, and this is my concern all the time, and I see it in the Republic of Ireland, they have a carbon budget plan. And like, I mean, you know, it's up for 2030, but how are they going to deliver on some of these things? Rolling out electric vehicles, targets set 200,000, 500,000, 1 million, 2 million, 40 million, 30% of the fleet. We haven't delivered on any of it for the last 10, 15 years. How do we think we're going to deliver on it by 2030? So I'm not a big believer. Do you know what? If you manage your money well, you manage yourself well. People who run into difficulty, 9 times out of 10, it's because they're not good managers of themselves and their budget. We're always going to have people like that in society. 10, 15% of the population are always going to need our support for different reasons. But the problem at the moment is there's another 10, 15 or 20% of the population who are now coming into that bracket because of the pressures due to COVID and now what's happening in Russia. So it's like the great economic depression in the US, isn't it? Really seems to be the feel of where we're going at the moment.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, I guess governments have, you know, pressures both ways, because clearly if it turned out that they you know, refused, you know, 10 more data centers thrown up because they were sticking to their, you know, green credentials and didn't want that to happen, they might get, you know, flack for not looking after the economy. So there is this, back to, I guess, where we came in, is it possible to be equally, you know, business-like, and or do we need to be more, you know, yes, everyone can make a profit, but within reason, as opposed to just rampant capitalism, which sort of trashes green things. We need to meet somewhere in the middle. Is that
you're spot on it? You just yeah. And I think what it is that our business leaders need to sort of get on board with that sooner rather than later.
Okay, well, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground, and I think the data centers, we gave them a fair amount of coverage as well. But I really appreciate your time today. So particularly as you're on holiday, but thank you very much.
No problem, my pleasure. And it's actually very warm where I am at the moment, and I'm not a creature who's used to the heat.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. It was a pleasure.